Alright, so you guys want to install a 3rd gen HEMI into your A, B, E body Mopar. These are some of the things you're going to need to handle on the motor setup before you drop it into the car. One of the first things you're going to have to tackle on this setup is getting a power steering pump. Most of the newer generation 6.4 liters actually have an electro-hydraulic power steering system on the car. So it has an electronic pump that feeds hydraulic fluid to the steering rack. Classic cars generally run like a Flaming River power steering rack and pinion conversion, or even just a standard power steering box. If you have a power steering box or a power steering rack and pinion conversion, you need either a physical power steering pump, which is available through Mopar Performance. It's easier to just have it on the motor because it's one less thing that you have to then mount externally. If you do an electro-hydraulic power steering system, generally those are a pump that are separated from the reservoir, and then you need to mount that pump somewhere, feed lines to the rack. And yeah, I get it, it's less drag on the motor, but this just simplifies all the things that you then need to mount into an engine bay. That comes into play when you're doing the difference between a B body and an E body. On our Roadrunner, we actually thought we had quite a bit of real estate in the engine bay, but at the same time, we also wanted to keep the amount of stuff that is mounted on the fender wells down to a minimum, because we really wanted it to look good and be aesthetically pleasing when you pop the hood.
Pop the hood?
On an E body, from what we can tell so far, it looks like I actually have slightly less space. So I'm now fighting, trying to find reservoirs and other things like for the coolant overflow, the power steering reservoir, find things that are more confined and smaller, easier to mount, so that way it looks aesthetically pleasing in the engine bay when we pop the hood. If you get a 6.1 liter HEMI engine, those generally come with a non-variable ratio AC compressor. The variable ratio AC compressor is run by the factory ECU, and it generally comes on the newer 6.4 liter engines. From what we've noticed so far is that it's coming on the 2014 and newer engines. Mopar calls this the front end accessory drive kit. So this is part of their kit. They also offer an alternator setup, and although we didn't purchase that on our B body, we're also not purchasing it on the E body. I wasn't able to find out 100% as to what is the difference of buying their alternator setup. The B body car works perfectly great. The alternator is completely replaceable. It's an OEM part that you can go to the dealership and get a new one, get a rebuilt one. So I didn't see a need to go ahead and change this out. It didn't have to change the tensioner either. The kit for the power steering does come with a new belt, but that belt is actually too short when you use the factory alternator. The factory belt that comes on the 6.4 liter with the idler pulley there actually fits. It is a little bit tight on the tensioner side, so you could go probably about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 inch of a shorter belt, which you can order at any Napa Rock Auto. You base it off the 6 PK number, and then look at the catalog and see which belt is actually slightly shorter for your needs. The belt routing is essentially the same as the stock 6.1 liter that has a power steering pump, and everything fits as it should. Going back to the AC compressor, there was a company that specialized in switching out your variable rate 6.4 liter AC compressor to a non-variable rate 6.1 liter HEMI compressor. We did that company's parts on the B body. Now this is our second go around, so I was able to do a lot more research and already had the willingness and knowing of what I needed to find to be able to cut some costs on the E body, so that way we got our own AC compressor, fittings and pigtail now, because the parts being supplied by that company, they literally only supply parts, and for some reason they forgot some of the things in it. So save yourself the time, do it yourself from the get-go. If you have to go and drive out there for a 30-cent part, and then you have to waste half an hour to go get a 30-cent part, your time is worth more than that. So if you're a part supplier, make sure all the parts are supplied. And if I send you an email and ask you why things are missing, don't just tell me where to go get it. Be like, oh shit, sorry about that, we'll send it out. If you don't do that, you suck. The next major upgrade you need to do on your HEMI, whether it's a 6.1, even a 5.7 or a 6.4 liter, you need to change the pan and pickup to correspond with the K-member or the mounts that are going into your A, B, or E body. On our setup, we use an altercation front subframe, which includes upper and lower A-arms, coilover suspension, new spindles, and it already has the ability to house new 12-inch and up Wilwood brakes, whether we want 4-piston, 6-piston. We can go all the way up to a 14-inch brake kit if we want to. Because of that subframe, you then need to use a new oil pan. So Milodon sells an oil pan, oil pump pickup, and the windage tray that you need to install on the motor before the motor actually gets set into the car. We tried it this time around without doing the windage tray, and come to find out this is a newer 2021 or 2022 motor. I can't remember exactly, I think it's 2021. So this 2021 motor, on the windage tray, it actually ended up being part of the gasket material that goes between the pan. We noticed that we needed to modify a lot of the windage tray to get it to fit. The windage tray from Milodon is $55, $60. Just buy the new windage tray. You're buying their gaskets, their pan, and their pickup anyway. It's already modified to work with their system, so just buy all of it from them. There's other suppliers also now, like Holley. They sell a pan and pickup and a windage tray setup, so you could choose the brand that you want to work with. Like I said previously, we worked with Milodon, so we're using it again because we know it worked out perfectly fine for this K-member that's in the E-body as it worked in the B-body. One of the other things you're going to need from Milodon in respect to the oil pan is the dipstick. Now, I don't remember 100% as to why I did this on the old setup, but I think it was based on dipstick orientation. I actually ended up opting for the HEMI 5.7 liter dipstick from Milodon. And I did that again for this car because, like I said, we're running the same subframe, same oil pan, same pickup tube. I figured everything works on our B-body Roadrunner, so why not replicate that again and do the same things that we already know work on our E-body. So we have that HEMI Milodon 5.7 liter dipstick, measures the oil reading right. This is a 6 or 7 quart oil pan. Everything's reading properly on that dipstick, so it's worked before and it's working again, so we're gonna go ahead and use that the second time around. All right, that's gonna do it for the front end of this motor and the oil pan setup you're gonna need to go ahead and drop this into your Mopar. So let's jump over to the transmission and see what you need to tackle there. One of the other things you're gonna need to get this motor into your Mopar is exhaust manifolds. The factory Challenger exhaust manifolds actually come out a little bit too far where it'll impede on your frame rails. Again, Mopar Performance sells complete kit that's manifolds, gaskets, hardware, everything you need to put new cast manifolds. You could also do the TTI, essentially HEMI big block headers that are for swapped cars. We don't generally want to deal with the issues that come with adapting long block headers into a small chassis. Factory cast manifolds actually release the exhaust gases out of a 3-inch exhaust hole. That is more than plenty. This motor makes about 485 horsepower at the crank in complete stock form. This setup now has a Mopar Performance ECU that is essentially unlocked of having all those things because it is going into a classic 1970s Mopar E-body. That allows you to unlock some more potential horsepower. So the cast manifolds that we are buying are actually flowing pretty well, even more so than the stock Challenger manifolds that are on this car. Thanks to Mopar Performance, is readily available. You can go ahead and order it through Mopar Parts Giant or any of the other suppliers like Summit Racing. Once we get those exhaust manifolds from Mopar Performance, you are gonna go ahead and have to notch out this specific engine mount. I'd rather notch the engine mount and recreate this tube framing as opposed to modifying the body of the car. It's a lot easier to modify an aftermarket mount than it is to modify your frame, which is once and for all, no going back. Leave the frame untouched, modify your aftermarket parts to make it fit. Again, that's something you might even have to deal with if you had long tube headers, and we know that's something we have to deal with these cast log manifolds because it's the same thing we had to do on the Mopar B-body. Jumping from the exhaust manifolds onto the transmission, again, as I mentioned, this is a factory, essentially 500 horsepower setup. The stock clutch in these, when we took it apart, it's almost, from what it appears, it is a factory twin disc setup. The pedal feel, everything out of the box on this pedal setup for the B-body feels absolutely awesome. It is perfect. You can modulate it. You really get a good sense of feeling of where the clutch bite is. And the only thing you need to do is buy a fitting to adapt this to your hydraulic clutch line. There is no point to convert this to any other type of hydraulic release bearing because the factory one works perfectly fine. And if you have any issues, you know you're just buying a hydraulic release bearing for a 2021 Dodge Challenger with a manual 6-speed. There's no need to get an aftermarket tilt and release bearing or any other aftermarket from Modern Driveline. They do an adapted release bearing to this. You don't need it. Just get the clutch line adapter that plugs into the stock housing, clips in, and you run that line to your hydraulic clutch conversion pedal setup that you can get from a multitude of suppliers. They also sell you the manual brake pedal, which has a smaller contact pad that matches your clutch pedal. Makes everything a lot more seamless and easier to install into your classic Mopar. The other thing you're gonna have to tackle on the transmission, the factory Challenger has a remote mounted shifter setup. On the back here, on this section right here, you have to swap this out and switch to a direct shift. Right now, there is a linkage coming out the back tail shaft of the transmission, which is actually being direct shifted. But the factory setup has linkage that mounts to these two ears and grabs this joint. It's a lot more similar to, say, like a BMW E36, E46 ZF 5-speed, 6-speed transmission. That's how they are set up. But those don't have this 4-bolt option to be able to direct shift your ZF transmission. Tremec made it so that this transmission is essentially more modular and you could change your type of shift setup. There is a company called Core Shifters, which is who we're going to reach out to again, to get the right fulcrum based on the length of shift handle we're going to have. On the Roadrunner, being that was like a full-on resto mod, 3-piece wheels, 4-link rear, now this car is going in that direction. So I am going to choose a proper fulcrum to have the throw of the shifter slightly less, because you don't want that long, sloppy, Hurst-style worn linkage feeling in a direct shifted transmission, especially with the new Tremec TR6060 Magnum transmission. These things are absolutely awesome. The shift feel is great on our Roadrunner B-body. Our shift feel is going to be just as great in our 71 CUDA, so we'll go ahead and reach out to Core Shifters once we get the transmission placed, so that way it's all based on the ergonomics depending on how long of a shift handle you want. So if the seating position is physically a little bit further back than our B-body, then I'm going to want a longer shift handle, which means that I need to extend the fulcrum that goes into the direct shift longer so it shortens the throw based on it having a longer handle. It's kind of like reverse mathematics, trying to figure out how you want your fulcrum to be based on your handle length and based on how much throw you actually want on the inside of the car. Honestly, like, it's easier. You either want short throw or long throw. You want a shorter throw, you extend the fulcrum. You want a longer throw, you have a shorter fulcrum with a longer handle. So that'll extend the amount that you physically have to move to throw it into the next gear. Gear ratios, you want short gears, up the number. You want long gears, lower the number. It's backwards. I don't know why, that's the way it is, and that's how it works. The more you know. All right, so just to recap some of the things you're gonna need to get this into your classic Mopar: oil pan setup with the pickup, dipstick, exhaust manifolds, engine mounts for a HEMI 3rd gen into your classic Mopar, along with the AC compressor, power steering setup, and some of those transmission bits that we talked about. It's gonna get you started on getting the swap done properly. Of course, you are gonna need a wiring system, whether you do the Mopar Performance Pack that comes with their ECU, or you got an engine transmission package that came with the factory harness. You send out your ECU, you send out your harness, it gets adapted and rid of all the factory emission stuff to go ahead and get that planted into your Mopar. Thank you guys for tuning in. That's everything you're gonna need to get your HEMI 3rd gen swap into your classic Mopar, at least the basics of what you're gonna need to get you started and onto the right track. This is not a sponsored build, so we are gonna go ahead and put the part numbers of all the suppliers that offer these items so you can get your project on the right track and get you started with a modern 3rd gen HEMI swap in your classic Mopar. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you next time.